Hi, Readly families. This is Miss Brewer. I'm here to read your One School, One Book 2024-25, The Water Horse. Thank you, PTA, for sponsoring us. Thank you, families, for sponsoring PTA. Here we go. I'll read chapter 1 tonight. Check back for another teacher to read your next chapter. Chapter 1, An Old Fish's Egg. It was Christy who found it. It was lying just above the high tide mark, a squarish package-shaped object the color of seaweed, with a long tendril sticking out from each of its four corners. It was exactly the shape, in fact, of a mermaid's purse, the little horny egg capsule of the dogfish that were commonly washed up on the beach. But this was the size of a large cookie tin. "Look what I found!" shouted Christy. "Quick, come and look!" In the small hours of March 26, 1930, a great storm struck the west coast of Scotland. The huge seas that it had wiped up smashed against the foot of the cliffs, and the tigerish tempest ran up the face of them and grabbed a small white house on the cliff top in its jaws. The house quivered and shook in the teeth of the wind, and Christy, waking up suddenly in fright, was sure that the roof had flown away. The noise of the storm was fearful. Angus will be terrified, thought Christy, and she jumped up out of bed and ran to her little brother's room next door. Her mother arrived at the same moment, carrying an oil lamp, and by its light they could see that Angus was sleeping peacefully, sleeping like a baby he had just been only a few years before. Outside, the thunder banged and lightning flashed, the wind roared and the rain poured. Angus snored. "Back to bed, Christy," said her mother. "I'll stay here a while in case he wakes." "What about Grumble?" said Christy. "Is he all right?" Grumble was Mother's father, who lived with them. When Christy was very small, she had heard Mother say angrily to him one day, "All you ever do is grumble, grumble." And so she had thought that it was his name. It suited him. He came stumping along the corridor now, a big old man with a thick, droopy mustache. "Can't sleep a wink," growled Grumble to his daughter and granddaughter, as though it were their fault. "Terrible weather. The Lord help sailors on a night like this." Christy and Mother grinned at one another, for Christy's father was a sailor, a merchant seaman. But at the moment his ship was, they knew, in quite tropical waters, far from tonight's frenzy Atlantic storm. At that moment there came a clap of thunder so close and so loud that Angus woke and sat up in bed. "I heard a noise," he said in a matter-of-fact voice. It's a storm, Angus," said Christy. "A big storm. Going to blow the house down in a minute. I shouldn't be surprised." Oh, that was Grumble. "Gonna blow the house down in a minute. I shouldn't be surprised," said Grumble. Just for a moment, the wind dropped a little, and they could all clearly hear the crash of the breakers on the beach below. What would the sea throw up? Christy wondered. What would they find on the shoreline tomorrow? All of them loved beachcombing, even Grumble, though he pretended he didn't, and a storm like this would leave lots of driftwood for them to collect. "Back to sleep, everyone," Mother said, "and in the morning we'll all go down and see what we can find." "What do you mean, in the morning?" said Grumble. "It's morning now. I shan't be able to drop off again, that's for sure." "You should count some sheep, Grumble," said Angus. "That's what I do." "You can only count to 10, Christy said. "I know. When I get to 10, I start again," said Angus firmly, and he lay down and shut his eyes. Back in bed, Christy lay listening to the roar of the storm. She was as wide awake as it was possible to be. And then, quite suddenly, it seemed, it was broad daylight. Christy was too excited to eat much breakfast. The worst of the storm had passed now. The wind had dropped a bit, and Mother had promised that they would go down to the beach as soon as breakfast was finished and the dishes were washed up. It was the thought of what might be washed up on the shore that was exciting Christy. Beachcombing was so much fun. You never knew what you might find. There was always lots of seaweed and creatures like starfish and jellyfish and sea urchins and loads of shells, whelks and cockles and cowries and razor shells. Then there was trash like empty bottles. Perhaps one might have a message in it from a castaway. And of course there was driftwood, wooden boxes and crates, planks and spars, once even a pair of oars. And the strange twisted shapes of branches and sometimes quite large limbs of trees, worn pale and smooth during the long voyages from goodness knows where. With such a storm as last night's, who knows what they would find. "Eat up, Christy," Mother said. Angus never needed to be given this order. Meals in his view were times for eatin', not for talkin'. From sitting up at the table to getting down from it again, he only opened his mouth to put food in it. "What do you think we'll find, Angus?" said Christy. Angus stared at her, his jaw chomping rhythmically. He did not answer. "Aren't you excited?" Christy asked. Angus nodded placidly. My egg's not boiled enough," said Grumble. They set out at last down the cliff path, Christy leading, carrying a little sack for putting things in, Mother following, holding Angus by the hand, and Grumble stumping along behind with a big sack and a length of cord to tie up bundles of driftwood. The seas were running very strongly still, and the breakers were huge but distant now, for the spring tide had ebbed. The pebbly beach was, as always, empty of people. The only living things on it were two seagulls picking at something that lay just above the high tide mark. They flew up as Christy ran towards. "Come and look," she shouted. "Quick!" "What is it?" Mother shouted back. "I don't know. It looks like a giant mermaid's purse." Angus ran as fast as his short legs would allow. He looked critically at the object. The gulls could not have been at it long, for it seemed unharmed. "I didn't know there were giant mermaids," said Angus. No dogfish could produce a thing like that, said Mother when she and Grumble arrived. "Why, it must be 20 times as big as an ordinary mermaid's purse. What do you think, Dad? Could it have come from the huge creature like a basking shark?" "Don't ask me," Grumble said. "We're here to collect firewood, so let's get on with it. This cold wind gets right up my bones." He prodded the thing with his foot. "Whatever it is, it's no use to us," he said, and he stumped on, with Mother following. "It moved!" Christy said. "Course it did." "Course it did," said Angus. "Grumble kicked it." "No, I mean, after he kicked it, I saw the outside of it, the skin on it. It moved. I'm almost sure it did. It sort of trembled." Angus peered at the giant mermaid's purse. "It isn't trembling now," he said. "Expect it's dead. Expect he killed it." He looked up at his sister and saw that she was upset at this thought. "It's only an old fish egg," he said. "Eggs don't feel anything. Those ones that Mother boiled for breakfast, they didn't feel nothing." "They didn't feel anything," said Christy. Angus sighed. "I just told you that," he said. "Sometimes I feel much older than you." "Well, you're not," said Christy quite sharply. "You're 3 years younger. Hold my sack open for me." She bent down and picked up the thing. It was heavy, as heavy indeed as a large cookie tin full of cookies. You're not going to take it home, said Angus. I am. Where are you going to put it in? In a bucket of water, just in case it's alive. It might hatch. You never know. Mother won't like it. Mother won't know. She'll ask what's in your sack. Christy thought quickly. Seaweed, she said. Grumble puts it in our garden for manure. And on top of the thing she placed some bunches of kelp. When they had all climbed the cliff path again, Grumble, complaining loudly of the weight of the driftwood bundle he'd carried, the children went off together to the garden, a small plot on the sheltered side of the white cliff-top house. Here their grandfather grew vegetables, grumbling endlessly about the poorness of the soil, the unkindness of the weather, and the damage done to his plants by the birds and slugs and caterpillars. Christy put the seaweed on his compost heap, filled a large bucket with water, and tipped the giant mermaid purse into it. It was too big to submerge, and two of its four tendrils stuck out forlornly above the surface. It's too big, Angus said. I can see that, silly, but at least it will keep it from drying out. What's it matter if it's dead anyway? We don't know if it's dead. Well, it soon will be. Why? Angus sighed. It came out of the sea, didn't it? That's tap water. It needs salt water. Angus, cried Christy. She gave him a hug. You're brilliant, she said. I know. Making sure that Mother was elsewhere, Christy got the container of salt from the pantry and poured a generous measure into the bucket. She looked carefully at the sticking out tendril, but they didn't move. It needs a bigger place, she said. I know. The bathtub. How the rest of the day dragged, but at the end of it, luck was on their side. Mother had a bath after her morning work. Grumble, on being asked, said no, he didn't want a bath. Too much washing was bad for his skin, and anyway, the water was already either too hot or too cold. So that only left the children. Mother gave Angus his bath at bedtime and left the water in it for Christy. He wasn't all that dirty, she said, and she took Angus downstairs to dry him by the fire, where Grumble sat listening to the radio, turned up very loudly, for he was rather deaf, and moaning that the program was rubbish. Christy moved fast. First, she let out Angus' bathwater. Then she put the plug back in, turned on the cold tap, and tiptoed down the stairs and out into the garden. In a couple of minutes, she was back in the bathroom, the giant mermaid's purse in both hands, the container of salt tucked under one arm. She lowered her burden gently into the water, added a little hot for luck, poured the whole contents of the salt container in, turned on the taps, and went out of the bathroom, closing the door. Christy awoke once in the middle of the night and could not resist opening the bathroom door and peeping in. But the thing was just floating, motionless. You're stupid, she said to herself as she was drifting back to sleep again. It's probably just a piece of seaweed, that's all. First thing in the morning, before everyone's up, I'll take it out and chuck it on Grumble's compost heap. First thing in the morning, Christy went quietly along to the bathroom. She had just grasped her handle of the door when she thought she heard something. She bent down, her ear to the keyhole. Through it, she could hear a small splashing, such a little fish might make breaking the surface of a stream, and then a small squeaking noise, a kind of chirp, such as a little bird might make breaking from the shell of its egg. Christy opened the bathroom door. You gotta wait till tomorrow night to read chapter 2. Have a good night. Happy reading.